Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this episode of The Federal. I am Naved Anjum, and I'm joined today by a very special guest, Samrat Choudhury, author and journalist, who is joining us from Kolkata. Samrat Samrat has just come out with a beautiful book on Northeast India, a political history. It has been published by HarperCollins. And his previous book was The Braided River. It was a journey. It basically chronicled his journey along the Brahmaputra, which came out in 2021, somewhere towards the end of the year. And it also sort of it's deeply personal in some sense, because it chronicles his travels downriver, but also a very lucid account of the region's history, its environment, and culture. Um, Samrat, welcome to this episode of the Federal. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yes. So Samrat, let's begin with Northeast India, and then we can go to your previous work, which includes a novel as well, The Urban Jungle, which was the modern retelling of Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Story, and it's a very fascinating work of fiction. And we can come to all of that, but let's begin with Northeast India. Of course, your preoccupation with the region has been there, in the sense that you have written extensively about the region. I just wanted to understand, from you, that how sort of, I mean, there's a lot of material in this book which sort of also, has its sort of traces back to your previous book, that's The Braided River. But also, if you could briefly tell us about the genesis for this book and what brought you to the to this political history of the region, which is very, very crucial to the idea of India, as you mentioned.
Well, I'm from the Northeast, born and brought up in Shillong, and life took me in other directions. So basically, I ended up studying in Gujarat and then working in Delhi, Bombay, and Bangalore, among other places. But it was actually when I was writing The Braided River that I got back into engaging with Northeast India as a region, because I traveled extensively during the course of researching The Braided River through primarily Arunachal and Assam, but I was back in the region. And being back in the region brought me back in touch with the issues of the region. So, for example, when we were traveling in Lower Assam, the NRC was in progress, and so we just casually ended up running into people whose names were not in the list. At that time, I was writing a very different book. I was writing a travel log. And so these issues sort of remained peripheral to that book, but they remained very much central to what was happening in the politics of Assam at the time. And of course, they were issues that I was interested in and wanted to engage with. So I ended up doing an edited volume, a co-edited volume, along with Preeti Gill, called Insider Outsider, which I thought was the core issue in Northeast India. It had been a part of my growing up, and I realized that it was still very much a live and very much a serious part of the political landscape of Northeast India.
Absolutely.
So we did this edited volume called Insider Outsider, with contributions by many well-known writers from the region. And right now, in fact, we are in the middle of doing the second part of that Insider Outsider volume.
Oh, wonderful.
We are bringing out a second volume of that. But the Northeast politics somehow followed from there. It was something that I had been squirreling material away for a while, and it seemed impossible in a sense to do, because it had not been done. Nobody has actually written a popular history of Northeast India. And so I was daunted by the size of the task, but basically, I somehow got pushed into it, and I ended up writing it, and so that's
Yeah.
the thing. Yeah.
Right. And the two things that struck me when I was reading the book, and looking at the Braided River when that came out. Of course, it was a hot button topic, considering that this whole talk around the National Register of Citizens and the CAA, and as we speak. Northeast and particularly Manipur has been in newspapers. It's been burning for months, and I wanted to understand from you before we begin to sort of talk about other states of the region. That's other 7 states of the region. Let's talk about Manipur, and you of course have each chapter dedicated to each of these states in the book. But beginning with Manipur, if you could tell us a little bit about how its sort of history comes in the way of its present, in the sense of this whole, conflict between Kukis and Mathis that's playing out before the nation's eye. How it has a historical backdrop, with roots in its relationships between these tribes, and what sort of triggered the conflicts over the years, and there of course integration after the independence and throughout those years when the conflict was at peak, and now it has somewhat sort of just when it was about to have some semblance of normalcy, that you have this huge issue with this conflict between the two,
Right.
between cookies and Mathis.
Well, it is, I think, it is indeed, in fact, rooted to a large extent in history. The history which brings these communities into conflict. A lot of people have been saying and writing recently, commenting about the hill-valley divide in Manipur, which of course has always been there for a very long time and has been known to the people there forever. But has now come into the national consciousness as well.
Yes.
Now, the thing is that hill-valley divide, the communities in the hills include both the Nagas and the Kukis. But the
Yes.
present conflict is only between the Meiteis and the Kukis. The Nagas are not a part of this present ongoing conflict.
Right.
Are not an active part of this present ongoing conflict. The history that is at root of this hill-valley divide is therefore important. Now, the thing is that the present situation, the Kuki demand for a separate administration is core to what they are looking at, what they want. And that is what the Meiteis will not allow. They are very clear that we will not allow any sort of balkanization of the state of Manipur. That is rooted in history because Manipur is a princely state, is a former princely state, an ancient kingdom which entered India in 1949. It merged into India in 1949. And so the Meiteis are basically the community which is, in a sense, which see the people who see themselves as inheritors of that legacy, the legacy of that kingdom. The kings who ruled from, according to the royal chronicles of the Manipur kingdom, the Chaitharol Kumpapa, the kings who ruled are believed to have been Meitei kings. That may or may not be true. We cannot be sure about the earlier parts of the chronicle, but that is what is believed. And so it is believed that Meitei kings ruled that kingdom since 33 AD, right up to past the independence of India. The issue is that during British rule, towards the latter part of British rule, the British, after obtaining effective control or indirect control of the princely state of Manipur, basically took over the administration of the hills directly, without including the Maharaja in the scheme of administration or in the system of administration of the hills. There is some reason for that, because there were separate wars or battles which were fought with each of the three major communities which inhabits Manipur, including the Kukis. So there was an Anglo-Kuki war. And it was after this that effective control in the hills or effective administration in the hills was actually extended. It was the British who extended effective administration in the hills. So the Kuki argument is that their villages were always independent and ruled by their chiefs. And until the British came, they were not ruled by the Maharaja. Right. Now, because the size of the kingdom varied at different points, because the system of administration then was very different from what it is now. So there may be good reason to on the part of either of these communities to press the argument either that the whole of Manipur was under the Meitei kings, hills as well as valleys, or that the hills were actually not directly ruled by the kings, that some villages at some points paid tribute and they differed from one king to the next king and from one village to the next village. So that is the historical backdrop which lies at the which underlies the hill valley dividing.
Right, right. So then you mentioned somewhere in the beginning of the book that with a work of this nature, how hard could it be for someone with no sort of organizational access to journals and the materials of history. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of the challenges that you had to face when it comes to the story of the Northeast, telling the North the way you do in this book.
Well, it's actually very difficult. First of all, because of the sheer diversity of the region. Because every state, it's first of all, it's 7 or 8 states, and the 7 or 8 is because Sikkim is always a question mark. It is an official part of the region. So then 8 states. Now 8 states is a lot of states. If you count 8 states from Kanyakumari, you can reach Kashmir if you start to go north in a straight line. So 8 states is a lot. And the sheer diversity of each of those states in themselves is also something remarkable. Because every state, now people are becoming aware that, oh, Manipur, there are 3 very distinct communities and they don't always get along. Actually, there's more than 3. So every state has 3 or 4 major communities and every community has its own history. So writing one history for the whole of Northeast India is actually very, very difficult. It might have been considered impossible, which is probably why it was not done. And so then there's other difficulties with accessing material. First of all, you don't have written records from several cultures because they were primarily oral cultures. Right. So you don't have written records at all. And written records begin in any serious manner with it's only with the with the colonial period for many of the states. There are princely kingdoms where the princely states, which are mainly in the valleys, where you do get some royal chronicles that go back a long way. So those royal chronicles are there for the Ahom kingdom, are there for the Meitei, the Manipur kingdom, are there for Tripura. But for several states, you don't have any written records before the colonial period. Yes. So those are challenges that anybody trying to write the history will face. On top of that, for me as somebody who's not an academic, who is working without a research grant of any kind, I was doing it on my own. So I didn't have access to a lot of material, which takes a lot of money to access. And I simply didn't have that money or resources. So that just made it a lot harder. So I did the best I could with the means at my disposal. Right. And I tried to write a readable introductory account. Right. It is meant to be, a lucid, easy introductory account, putting the basic events in the political history of each of these states into one narrative thread. Right. Right. If you could give us a sense of, I mean, of course, you mentioned that how these
eight states were different and how they sort of became a part of modern India in under different circumstances in a way. They continue to be different, and that is the reason that explains this disconnect that has marked the relationship between the Northeast and the rest of the India in many ways. If you could give us a sense of, how these conceptions of, say, Bharat and Hindustan, and how uh, these conceptions sort of have influenced the region's political history, and what role, I think in the beginning you have two chapters detailing what role imperialism, Christianity, and played in the region's history, and also the British influence that was again very, very instrumental in what happened, how the region came to be sort of its geographical sort of division in that sense.
Well, the British influence has been very strong. So I was interested in how the present borders came to be drawn. The present borders of Northeast India as a region and within Northeast India internally. And so each of the lines has a name which is drawn from the name of some colonial officer. And so you've got McMahon line, you've got the uh, sorry, what am I saying? You've got Radcliffe line, which is also there with Bangladesh. You've got the Pemberton line, which is basically with Burma. So Pemberton Johnson. So you've got lines which are named after British British officers, and the British influence has been very very strong as far as drawing each of these boundaries is concerned. It has also been very strong as far as bringing many of these regions into modern India goes, because there is no record of them being a part of any central authority in the past, and certainly not any central authority emanating from Delhi. They were not part of any emperor ruling Delhi at any point in history in some cases. And so, for example, even say in the Lushai Hills, what is Mizoram, it's only after the colonial period, it's well into the colonial period, that one starts to find records of these people. Basically, they have the British fight with them again and again, fight various battles with them, and gradually set up some kind of administration in those areas. So one does not find in many cases the establishment of any administration of any kind in any of those hills until well after the advent of the colonial period. They were not even on maps in many cases. There were blanks on maps, and nobody knew what lay in those lands. Even after 1900, well after 1900. So the blanks of the map were being explored by explorers who wanted to discover what lay there. So it is definitely we can have imaginations of a past which projects a certain idea of a country back into the past, or of a state back into the past, but we must remember that that is anachronistic, because basically, if for example I talk about Meghalaya, the state of Meghalaya, which is where I was born, if I talk about that state before its formation, so it became a state after it was separated out from Assam. But I can't talk about a Meghalaya in 1947, because in 1947 there was no Meghalaya. It was still a part of Assam. So similarly, we have to accept that political boundaries, political identities have changed over the years, and different places have acquired different names gradually over a period of time. So it applies to small units as well as big units. It applies to states and to the country as a whole.
You have a very interesting account of how tea, I mean cups of tea, and that connected, of course, the region with China, and and subsequently what happened, and the religion. I mean, the two things that sort of key to its emergence as a the modern Northeast as we know today. If you could talk about that a little bit, because I thought that was really fascinating.
Well, the first things which took the which had a lasting impact on a lot of history subsequent, the region's subsequent history.
Yes.
The formation of modern identities is also related to the standardization of modern languages. Now,
Absolutely.
we often forget that our modern languages were not always like this. But the languages before, we had many, a plethora of dialects, and then one of those dialects became the standard vernacular, and so the vernacular gets standardized, and then it's set in print, and it becomes the standard language. Because in the past you would have sacred languages, but the vernacular was usually not used as a standard. So the standard vernacular, the standardization of vernaculars in the case of several of these languages in Northeast India happens after the first printing press arrives. And the first printing press arrives because the American Baptist missionaries have come all the way from America bearing a printing press so that they can print the Bible.
Yes.
And so they want to gain converts, and they come to Assam, and they bring a printing press all the way with them, and then they start, they're Americans, they don't know the local language, and so they start learning, and they learn by, so it so happens that they set themselves up in Upper Assam first, near in Sadia, right at the tip of Upper Assam, and then subsequently they moved to Sibsagar, also in Upper Assam, and they learn the local dialect there, and they set that in print, and that becomes the standard vernacular, the standard form of the vernacular for Assamese. And the first grammars and dictionaries are drawn up, and that comes to have a lot of subsequent impact on the region and its politics, because then gradually issues develop between Bengali and Assamese, and between the Bengali and Assamese linguistic identities. And that comes into the politics of the place, and that has, I think, to some extent remained in the politics of the place even to the present. And so the that is one aspect of how the advent of the missionaries had an impact. But there are, of course, the simple fact of the conversion.
Right.
So, for example, 3 of the states in the Northeast are Christian majority states, and 2 others have almost equal proportions of Christians and Hindus, of which Manipur is one. So even in terms of the impact they've had on the population, it's been a very strong, very lasting impact, which remains to this day. T is the method by which the modern economy. So before that, you don't have the modern capitalist economy operating there. A lot of places you don't have, for example, wage labor.
Yes.
You don't have taxes being paid in cash, right? You don't have shops. You don't have a lot of things. The basics of the modern economy are not really there until after the advent of after tea is discovered in Assam, and the British, who at that time are very concerned that they are losing their East India Company is deeply concerned that they're going to lose their supply of tea from China, which is what their fortune is based on.
Bill.
And and so then they realize that, oh, we found another place where tea can be grown, and so they get interested, and then they annex that region, and then they start setting up tea plantations, and so the tea economy is very central to the advent of the modern economy into Northeast India and its integration into British India. Because without uh, they were a company, they were interested in profit, and without without the aspect of revenue, they would probably not have been interested in annexing many of those areas at all.
Hmm.
So tea and the religion have played very stellar roles in forming the modern region as it is now.
Absolutely. Also, one of the many ways I think this region has sort of evolved across time, and the kind of identity it has today is shaped by its historical linkages between between the region and the countries, the neighboring countries like Myanmar, Bangladesh, China. Of course, China, we have all seen what has been happening in Arunachal Pradesh, for instance, in recent years. And you, of course, have written, in detail of what happened, basically, how the geographical positions shape the region's political landscape in some ways. And if you could briefly talk about that as well, particularly China, because that continues to be a concern for India as far as territorial integrity is concerned.
Well, it is always normal, especially before the advent of modern communications technologies, including modern transport technologies, for people to go as far as they could go from where they were with the means of transport that existed then in olden days. So you walked, or you went on horseback, or you took a boat if it was possible to travel by river. So the networks of exchange, of interaction tended to be local. If you look at the map for some states in Northeast India, their neighbors are across on the other side of what is now an international border. In the case of Manipur, which is so much in the news now, for example, part of the problem is because the Kukis have ethnically related communities on the other side of the border in the Chin Hills, and they're very similar people. So it was natural for people to have interactions with those who are just across the other side of the hill from them. And that may now be another country. That is the case, whether it is we are talking about Burma, or whether we are talking about the Bangladesh border, which is really an open, it's in the plains, so it's even more easy to traverse.
Yeah.
And it's the same communities in many cases on both sides of the border. It is a mistake when people think that everybody in Bangladesh is a Bengali Muslim. That is not the case, because I have walked across that border. I know that there are Khasi hills on that, Khasi villages on the other side of the Meghalaya border from Shillong. I can name the villages, and they're in Sylhet. And across from the Garo hills, you have Garo population on this side, Garo population on that side, tribal Garo population this side and that side. Khasi hills, you have tribal Khasi population this side and that side. And so it's like that. It's a mixed population which exists on both sides of the world. And similarly, in the case of China, so you have people who are ethnically related to those just across from them, just across on the other side from them. They've had historical interactions.
Right.
Now you have this situation of a territorial dispute. The fact of the matter is that until the early years of the 1900s, neither China nor the British Indian authorities knew what exactly lay in many of those areas. Those were blanks on maps, and neither the Chinese nor the British Indian authorities had the faintest clue about the people or the lands. There are records where they're discussing that the people there are cannibals, and they're describing in detail that, for example, saying that in the wedding feast, the cannibals, if nobody else can be found, serve the mother of the bride as the special dish for the wedding feast. Absolute nonsense. but that was the state of knowledge about some of those areas. So it is, I think, incorrect on the part of the Chinese to pretend that it was always a part of China. It was definitely not. There were interactions of a more local nature with Tibet on that side, and with Assam on this side.
Hmm. Right. Coming back to Manipur, Samrat, there is this bit about what basically the center did in the state for many years, in the sense that, and I'm referring here to things like AFSPA and this protest by women and of course the story of Iram Sharmila we all know, and uh, it's quite ironical that all this protests over an act which was of course violated extensively. We all know, the media reported it, but it never, it was never considered that the people of Manipur, if they were sort of protesting over something as that never happened. That act was sort of never, and it continues to be in place, of course. How do you think these centers' relationship with Manipur has sort of affected what has transpired in all these years, especially after the elections?
After which elections? The most recent
The
elections?
recent elections, yes. Yeah.
Well, Manipur, and not just Manipur, but more the other states in Northeast India also have had a fraught and difficult relationship with the center
Right.
for a long time. So that is not something which is particularly new. Um, the Naga struggle for independence is the one which is probably the most cited and most talked about. But of course, everybody knows that there is a history of long-running insurgencies across the region, and
Right.
Manipur also had its share of insurgencies going back to the 60s, and uh, so basically the Naga insurgency was actually there even before that. It was already there in Manipur, in the Ukhrul region, even before that.
Yes.
But because the Armed Forces Special Powers Act was initially intended for Nagaland and Manipur in 1958, it was
Yes.
brought as an ordinance, and it was meant to be there for 6 months, and then it became law, and then it was not expected that it would be there until now, because it is a special provision of law which is meant to be there for exceptional circumstances. But the state of exception has lasted from 1958 to 2023.
Right.
So anyway, so the problems there go back a long way. They're rooted in history again. The insurgencies there, especially since you mentioned Manipur, in the case of Manipur, there was also a Meitei insurgency, Meitei-dominated insurgency. There were Meitei-dominated insurgent groups as well, were normally referred to as valley-based insurgent groups to separate them from the hill-based ones. And there were and are Naga and Kuki insurgent groups as well. The general demand on the part of each of these has been based on ideas of nationalism. And by nationalism, I mean sort of either a Manipuri nationalism, which is largely Meitei dominated, or Kuki nationalism or a Naga nationalism.
Yes.
Have their own ideas of territories that ought to be under their control, and the concept of a country that would incorporate all those ideas has been in circulation in the case of the Nagas from 1947.
Right.
So it is, all these multiple nationalisms have been clashing in Manipur with each other and with Indian nationalism for several decades now.
Okay. Something about Assam, because a large part of the political narrative is centered on a particular community, and Assam also happens to be a state which has the most number of Muslims in some sense. And I wanted to understand from you that, from the modern political strife in state, and there was talk about CA and NRC also, Assam was at the center of it. And I wanted to understand from you that if you could give us a sense of, this linguistic, religious, these different identities, how they sort of play in Assam, and how do you sort of look at it?
Well, usually in the Northeast, ethnic identity is more important than religious or linguistic identity, but Assam is the most important state in the region. Yes. And in the case of Assam, that is not so much the case. In Assam, historically, it has been linguistic and to some extent religious identity, which have played a very strong defining role in the politics. The concerns are related to migration, jobs, who dominates the state, and that goes back to before independence. The initial concerns were basically of a linguistic nature, because when Assam became a part of India, of British India, after the British defeated the Burmese, and because Assam had fallen under Burmese occupation along with Manipur. And so the British defeated the Burmese and gradually took over Assam, Manipur, and other parts of Northeast India after 1826, slowly over a long period of time. So when Assam became part of India, of British India, the administration was extended from Rangpur in what is now Bangladesh. And the staff who went there were mostly Bengalis, the lower level staff. The sahibs were the sahibs right on top, but the administration was run by people below them. And so what happened was that it became an issue because Bengali came to dominate the Bengali language, and the Bengali clerks and other petty officials in many cases became very, very dominant. And that was resented by the local people. And so then the initial politics to a great extent was between these linguistic identities, between the Bengali and the Assamese linguistic identities, which are very similar. Bengali and Assamese are actually very close to each other in many ways. But there was a problem between. It is like Konkani and Marathi. They're very similar, but there was a difference and there was a problem. So the issue of religion, I think, became salient only with the movement for Pakistan, and that slowly, by then you already had an assembly, you already had elections. People forget that there were elections in British India as well. And the assembly, for example, the first assembly in Northeast India in Shillong, the Assam Assembly, was established in 1937, and under the Government of India Act of 1935. And so you had elections, you had politics, and these issues. You have a situation where the Muslim League and the Congress are fighting it out, and so religion became an issue at that point. It started becoming an issue at that. Religious politics began because Jinnah had wanted Assam to be a part of Pakistan, so that was one of the reasons. That became an important religion, became an important aspect of the politics. And then after that, people forget that Assam also suffered partition. It was the only place where there was a referendum at a district level. And Sylhet district of Assam had a referendum and went to East Pakistan after the referendum. And so then the Hindu refugees from there, the Hindu Bengali refugees from there came this side to Assam. And so then that again remained a factor. The issue of language and religion both remain factors in the politics since then, from then to now.
How different was the case of Sikkim, considering its controversial sort of accession to India in as late as 1975, and that was also the year of it was very year of the, I think, emergency.
Yeah, Sikkim was the last state to become a part of the Indian Union.
Mm-hmm.
Sikkim has always been a little different from all the other states of Northeast India also. It
Right.
was, as you know, a Himalayan princely kingdom. And the king there, the Chogyal, seems to have had ideas of retaining his independence in the
Mm-hmm.
manner that Bhutan remains an independent Himalayan kingdom.
Yes.
But perhaps he had misjudged his position
Mm-hmm.
because he found that his rule was very swiftly sort of undermined, and he was forced to appeal to India for help. And once that happened, then there was a referendum which favored access into India, and Sikkim became a part of India. However, even within the states of India, it still continues to enjoy a very different kind of special status. Several of the states in Northeast India still have, like Kashmir had Article 370, several states in Northeast India have special provisions under Article 371. And so Manipur has something, Nagaland has something, Sikkim also has something. They have special provision, and within their assembly also there is, for example, there are certain unique features. For example, there is one seat which is reserved for the Buddhist Sangha. So
Mm-hmm.
a Buddhist monk is always a part of the assembly, and the electorate for that seat is Buddhist monks only. So they
Right.
have some special features which have been retained as a part of the deal that brought them into India.
Two more questions about this book and the writing of history per se, and then we move on to your previous books, and then we can wind up this interview. Um, when it comes to history writing, Samrat, there is a there has been a debate going on, and especially in the light of what the right-wing historians like JSI, Deepak, and they have to say about the historians such as Romila Thapa or Irfan Habib, and how there has been a constant effort to sort of rewrite history in many ways. So at a time when there is a lot of vilification going around, the historians continue to be shown, in bad light, and there's a lot of disdain towards them, towards history writing. Uh, I wanted to understand your own take on this. That at this moment in history, what does this whole exercise entail? How are the historians going to look at this phase that we are in?
Well, I'm not a historian, so I'm not a professional historian. I
So
think
you
neither is Sai Deepak, so I think we're in the same boat as far as that is concerned.
right.
So I'm not a professional historian,
Yes.
and I am a journalist, and I wrote an account which I consider to be
Hmm.
some ways journalistic, and
Yes.
so I respect the different professions for their expertise. I
Hmm.
don't think that I know more about medicine than a doctor. I don't think that that the doctor knows more about journalism than me.
Hmm.
And similarly, I don't think that I know more about history than the professional historians
Yes.
who are good at their craft.
Hmm.
There are there are good journalists and bad journalists. There are good historians and bad historians. But
Hmm.
somebody who is well trained professionally in
Hmm.
whatever may be their politics, they may be left, right, center. I don't care, as long as they're good at their work.
Right.
They've done a thorough job. It's fine. And for me as a journalist, I look at it. I understand that every story can be told in different ways,
Hmm.
and I see that as being fair enough. You do a good job.
Right.
You do a solid enough job. You
Hmm.
don't have to agree with me, and I
Yes.
don't have to agree with you. You write your book. I'll write my book. Let somebody else write their book. Let
Absolutely.
let 100 flowers bloom. What's the problem?
Bloom, absolutely. That's how it should be. Yeah, yeah. And this moment in the history of Northeast also, I was curious to know how would you look at how it is going to impact the future of the region in that sense, irrespective of what happens in Manipur, whether Biren Singh leaves or not, or generally this moment, you know, across the region, in fact, is going to have, considering the the political upheavals in recent years and this political shift also that has been happening.
Well, actually, things had turned around in Northeast India. So basically, after 2009, and this can be borne out by figures also. If you look at fatalities in conflict,
Right.
which the statistics would be available, you will find that the numbers went down from 2009 onwards in a steady graph, more or less steady graph, and that was continuing. That reduction in conflict was continuing since 2009. It started because of a change of government in Bangladesh. When Sheikh Hasina came to power, she dismantled the insurgent camps there, and that is where it started. Then there was also the Act East policy. Burma had turned around miraculously, and there was hope afoot in Burma as well. And so people across the region were talking about, or dreaming of a prosperous future, peaceful and prosperous future. And I myself remember writing something along those lines for the New York Times in 2012. And so it was the hope that things are turning around. But now, things started to go bad, basically. The mood started to change. First, the NRC, which really, brought a lot of instability into people's lives. And it still has not been resolved. The people who are out, they still remain in a state of limbo, effectively. So that's, you're talking about many lakhs and lakhs of people, millions of people. Then you've got the CAA, which came and further aggravated emotions and tensions in the region. Now you've got Manipur, and so they're piling up. Things are piling up. The issues in Manipur are not related to just Manipur. Now it's already creating tensions in Mizoram and between Mizoram and Manipur. The Nagas have been very peaceful so far, but it is, I think, a precarious balance, because it will not take much for that to change either, probably. One incident somewhere can start, because we saw in the case of this, it was one incident and the whole state. So it is quite precarious in that sense. And so it is hard to predict how things will turn out. People really want peace, but the things that have happened have been so harmful for so many people's lives. So many lives have been lost, so many lives have been destroyed, that a lot of bitterness has built up. And that's not going to be easy to just forget about and move on. You create these reservoirs of resentment. You can't then just say that, okay, fine, now forget about it. We are going to talk about how wonderful everything is. That doesn't work.
And how women have, particularly harrowing has been the fact that, how women have been treated in this whole, the violence that has hit the state ever since. We all saw that video, and it was just so horrifying, and at the same time very, very tragic. So I would also like you to talk a little bit about the Braided River. Of course, like this book that also is very, very lucid in that sense, that, and also it's a book that also sort of draws, on a lot of things. I mean, of course, it's travelogue, but it's also memoir, it's also history, it's also a lot about environment, ecosystem, culture, the identities. You weave in so many strands, and it's a fabulous account of your journey down river. And I was curious um, to know what sort of how did you arrive at that? Of course, it emanated from, it sprang from your journeys, but when you were doing that, were you conscious that it's going to turn into a book? And were you taking notes? How did that come about?
So this book actually, so the journey happened because of the book rather than the other book.
Right.
So I was in Bombay,
Right.
and I was invited to attend a conference at Jamia by Sanjay Das, and
Okay.
I wasn't even presenting. I just went to attend because I was free that weekend and I wanted to be a part of that conference, even if I'm just in the audience sitting and listening to people.
Mm.
And so I went, and at a break, I ran into P.T. Gill, with whom I later edited the book on the insider outsider issue.
Yes.
And she is and was also, among other things, a literary agent.
Mm.
And she told me that somebody is looking for somebody to write a book on the Brahmaputra, and would you
Okay.
be interested?
Mm.
So it seemed impossible because I was then staying in Bombay, and this is the absolute other opposite end of the country. And
Mm.
the Brahmaputra is a big river, and that's a very long journey. So it sounded daunting and, in fact, impossible.
Right.
So I said, I'll think about it. And I thought about it for a couple of days, and then I said yes. I didn't know how I would do it. I just said yes. And
Mm.
then I jumped into it, and it happened. And once I started traveling, I broke up the journey into segments.
Mm.
And my friend Akshay and I, we traveled together. He's a photographer. He's a very excellent photographer. So he took the photos for that book. And
Mm.
we traveled down from Arunachal. Uh,
Okay.
and I basically made it a habit to keep notes
Mm.
all along the way. And so
Right.
the notes then became the backbone of the book that emerged.
Would you also like to talk about the Partition Studies Quarterly, this online journal that you have been involved with? That basically, just to tell the viewers, that it's basically a journal that focuses on the forgotten histories of the partition, including those of the Northeast India. Am I right, Samrat? Is that what the idea was
Yes.
behind the journal?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So this is a very small effort started by three of us. My friends, two of my friends from Shillong, Professor Vinayak Datta, who's a professor of history at the Northeast Hill University, me, and Amrita Gupta Singh, who is an art historian.
Right.
And so all of us share one thing in common. We are all the descendants of East Pakistan refugees. And so it is, in some sense, it is motivated by a desire to understand our own pasts. And we realized also that very few people outside the region know about this refugee experience in Northeast India, because people remember partition happened in Punjab. They may remember it happened in Bengal, but actually Punjab has long overshadowed the partition narrative.
Yes.
Bengal is second, and the fact that partition happened in other places is forgotten. Actually, Northeast India, all of it was in some way or the other affected by one partition or the other. Jammu and Kashmir was affected and remains affected by a de facto partition. And so there are other places which have suffered similar experiences. And so we were interested in those experiences, in chronicling those experiences.
Right.
So that's why we started it. It was a voluntary effort on the part of the three of us, and we had again there was one gentleman who backed us with 50,000 rupees, which is the total that we received in terms of sponsorship or support. With that, we started the site, and we ran it. We continue to run it, but we are hoping to get ISSN.
Okay. Yeah.
So that then we can actually expand it and do something more with it.
Right. I do hope you get it soon. And on that note, Samrat, thank you so much. It was really lovely talking to you. All the best for the book. I'm sure it's going to find its readers everywhere. Thank you.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.